Hey guys, it's Lohpally here with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the tier list for the new patch that's coming out at 11.6. So the primary change really is just going to be some light changes to some lifesteal stuff. So in retrospect, it's not going to have too much impact on what we're looking at for supports. So let's just start talking about what we are looking at in terms of our tier list. So one thing to note is my tier lists are made for people who are maybe coming back to the game or don't have a lot of time to put into the game. I also calculate that usually players are usually between silver and platinum who usually look for tier lists in this sense. So I will explain kind of what my format is for this and kind of why I think each of the champions are powerful and what makes them powerful. Basically, we have our S tier list where basically even if you haven't been playing the champion very long, or if you're just looking for something stylistically to line up with how you want to play the game, these are great champions for it. S tiers are easy to pick up, they relatively fit with most team compositions, and provide really a niche or powerful element to your team compositions themselves, and they're kind of easy to pick up. A are champions that are a bit stronger when you're really proficient at them, or you pick them in very specific scenarios, but in some games, in solo queue especially, where people are not quite on the same page, these champions can struggle in some cases. They're still really great picks and relatively close to the same power level as S, but not quite there. After that, we have our B tier list, which is just going to mostly be champions you can play, but will have some weaknesses in either the laning phase or team fights, or kind of fall off as the lane goes on or the game goes on. After that, we have the C tier list, which are champions that are supports, but I probably wouldn't recommend playing them right now because they either don't fit the current way that the game is molded, don't pair well with a lot of ADCs, or are generally just not that great. And then D are basically champions that are kind of unplayable. So without further ado, let's jump into our S tier list, which is going to be Bard, Karma, Leona, and Lulu. These champions aren't ordered in any particular way in strength of power. These are just all really great champions. So let's tackle each of them and what individually makes them really powerful. Number one is Bard. Being able to roam around the map and cause terror for the enemy laners is really, really great, and Bard does this the best. He gains EXP by himself, and he can also gank from different locations because of the fact that he can Bard portal. So he almost always gets to locations first and can do a lot of damage in the early stages. Because of this, he's great at snowballing your solo laners and moving around the map. On top of that, he does have some really powerful team fights if you're hitting your ultimate quite frequently, and it allows you to kind of have a pseudo engage, despite the fact that he's relatively a ranged champion. On top of that, because of his flexibility as a champion, where you can go Guardian, Electrocute, Mandate, Locket, as you can kind of see what I'm listing off, his flexibility is insane. Because of that, he can build any item that you want to fit your needs. So because of that, you can kind of adjust what you need for your team composition based on your rune setup and your itemization. Need a tank, need damage, maybe you need an enchanter with a moonstone. He fits all of these really well. On top of this, because of the fact that he's kind of an EXP printer in that sense, he's really great at making so that your AD carry can get ahead. Solo lane EXP is very potent in this game right now, and the way you should see it is every level is extra gold on your teammates and on yourself because of the fact that it gives you powerful levels of your skills, which reduces cooldown and increases their power, but it also gives you health, mana, armor, and MR, making you incredibly durable. So our Bard comes in as the number one roaming support. If you like roaming around a lot, moving around the map, ganking different lanes, Bard's definitely the champion to be playing right now. Next up is going to be Karma. Karma's received several buffs over the last couple of patches that have basically made her Q kind of cost almost no mana at all and have really short cooldown. Because of this, one of the biggest problems Karma used to have with her is the fact that she does relatively light damage as the game goes on, doesn't have great itemization, and she's kind of weak in the late game. But because of all these cooldown changes and the fact that she pairs really well with a lot of champions, thinking Caitlyn, Jhin, Tristana, etc., champions that want to push and siege turrets, she does really well. I also really like her because of the fact that if you're looking for an enchanter right now that just wants to shield, heal, and kite backwards and play with a team and team fight, she's really great at all of these, but also crushes lane. If you ever have a lane that doesn't pick something that can play super aggressively, you can kind of run over lane really easily, and right now a lot of people tend to give up games very easily if you get early leads, so it's a great snowballing champion for laning phase and really strong for team fighting. On top of that, you can just kind of spam Qs on your lane over and over again, which allows you to get pushed. Now, she doesn't move around quite as well as someone like Bard, but she does have opportunities to move around the map with the fact that she can shield herself and speed up and move around. On top of that, Moonstone's really common nowadays in the Staff of Flowing Water, so she has pretty good itemization when it goes throughout the entire game. And she scales reasonably well now because your Q is on such a short cooldown. It's easy for you to cycle multiple Mantra shields over and over again in fights, so her power level as the game goes on isn't depreciated nearly as much as it used to be. Next up is going to be Leona. Now, Leona is pretty much the S tier champion above champions like Alistar just because of the fact that she's really tanky before you need to hit level 6, and she just does more damage. Usually one of the drawbacks of playing a champion like Galio and Alistar, as you can kind of see under us, is their damage is kind of on the lighter side of things. So the nice thing about Leona is she has multiple lockdowns, lots of forms of engage, and she just does a bit more damage. So it's a lot easier for you and your teammate to score kills on people. Plus, a lot of times because of the fact that her Q is such a short cooldown, even if your AD carry can't quite catch up at the start, you can kind of run ahead of them and then hit the stun a second time, pretty commonly in fights, and that will usually secure you kills. She does team fights really, really well and scales super well with all of the itemization, and now that there is the chem tank, you can also be a primary engage on her if you don't want to build Locket. After that is going to be Lulu. Lulu comes in pretty much as one of the also premier champions just because of the fact that she pairs really well against assassins and pairs really well with certain ADCs. So if you can have something that is hyper scaling or auto attack based a lot, examples of this is Jinx since the recent buffs. Lulu pairs really well with these champions. If you have Lulu Jinx, Lulu Vayne, even Lulu Kai'Sa for a lesser extent, it makes it so it's very easy for you to just kind of put shields on them, be a stat stick, and power them up a lot. These champions that usually have a lot of trouble when they're being all in, between Guardian, your E shield, and your Lulu ultimate, just makes it so hard for your teammate to die, and it unlocks them to be a lot more aggressive, and it makes it a lot harder to dive this champion. On top of the fact that she just has a point-and-click CC, it means that she can deflect ganks really, really well, which is maybe one of the complaints maybe Karma users kind of have, that Lulu kind of fills this void in that sense. Plus, she's relatively easy to pick up, and even if you're not super exceptional at her, you can still farm really reasonably well on her, play defensively, and just scale up and protect your super carry. Next is the AE categories. So we're gonna kind of cruise through this a little bit better, which is I think Thresh is actually one of the best supports when you're super good at him, but he's a little bit harder to pick up, and you kind of need a lot of practice on aiming hooks, flaying, knowing when to play aggressive, defensively, etc. And so people who are not nearly as experienced with him or skilled with him tend to struggle a little bit. So he kind of goes in the A category, but the caveat is if you're exceptionally good at him, he kind of moves up to S tier in that regard. So that's the main thing that's limiting him, is just the fact that he takes a lot of skill to learn. Next is going to be Rel. One of the biggest problems a lot of people have with Rel is they only think of the champion very binary. Most people don't know that you can R while you're in the air with the W, and you can stun. There's a lot of subtle angles and abilities that you can use in between each thing, like laning where you're dismounted and then remount and flip people over your shoulder to kind of lane out a lot of pressure in that sense. So because of the fact that it takes a lot of experience and kind of knowing a lot of the mechanics of the champion, I rate her also like an A. She has a lot of lockdown, but she tends to actually not be tanky at all in team fights, which is kind of one of my drawbacks of her. So if your engage is kind of flubbed or not that great, and you're just kind of frontlining for your team, you're not going to be nearly as durable as a champion like Alistar or Leona. Next up is Galio. Basically, I like Galio because of the fact that he can peel and kite backwards, but also ulti in. But the main problem with Galio is once again, he's kind of lighter on the damage, and he has a bit more subtlety when it comes to your combos, so reading damage is a little bit more difficult. And because of the fact that he doesn't have an actual hard engage button, he can be difficult to play when you're looking for engages, but you can't quite look for them because of the fact that Galio doesn't have a go in button nearly as well as other champions. Next is Morgana. I think Morgana is a great counter pick champion. She does exceptionally well against champions like Rel, Galio, Leona, etc. But the problem is she's a terrible blind champion, and also you need to be very good at hitting your black shield. So main drawback of this champion and why she's not an S tier is just because of the fact that player skill kind of gets involved, and if you mess up one or two black shields, the champion's power level depreciates a lot. Also, she doesn't use mythics very well, so even when you get into the later stages of the game, she feels a little bit unsatisfying when you're building items like Zonia's and Cosmic Drive, etc. Next is Alistar. Main problem with Alistar is just the fact that he's not relatively tanky till level 6, and some people have a difficulty playing tanks where they alter between runes. So phase rushes is definitely a really good secondary rune setup to run if you're playing against a lot of ranged champions, but it takes a lot of time and energy and skill to learn how to bounce between the two of them, and he kind of lacks the ability to engage and actually kill someone by himself, so you need people to be pristinely on point with you when you do the engages. So he's really a good champion, really great frontliner, but lacks that damage and really needs that precision engage with your teammates, which sometimes just doesn't occur and can cause a lot of frustration. Next is kind of our B category, which we'll lightly tackle, and most of these champions either have problems as the game goes on, or just itemization is a big issue for them too. So champions like Blitzcrank and Nautilus, they're really kind of like all or nothing. Either you're hitting all your hooks and scoring a ton of kills, or you're kind of relatively useless in most of the game. So the problem is they're just polarizing. They don't have like a good standard base of functionality. Like at least with Thresh, even if you're missing your hooks, you have your Lantern, you can put a box down in fights, Flay, etc. You have a lot more flexibility when it comes to this. Champions like Brand and Zyra and even kind of things like Nico, the biggest problem they run into is the economy. They don't have enough money a lot of times to do enough damage, and usually when they want to play aggressive in laning phase, it leaves them exposed to being all-in / ganked. So they're kind of a razor's edge kind of champion where you have to play very well aggressively without getting yourself killed, which can cause some problems where you just chain feed the entire time. Next are champions like Nami, Yuumi, and Seraphine. I think the biggest problem with these champions is they're relatively weaker in the laning phase and don't quite have that pressure or kill pressure most often than not, and they don't have great deflect tools either. Whether Seraphine, which is hard to hit her skill shots and long cooldowns between everything, Yuumi, where she isn't even a champion in the laning phase, so it can cause your AD carry to not quite know how to lane 2v1 in that sense, or Nami, where Bubble is just a really hard skill to hit. They just struggle with lane presence a lot of the time. And Senna kind of runs into the same problems that I talked about with things like Brand and Zyra, which is just the fact that you have to play this champion hyper aggressive to get good value out of it, and you can run into a lot of problems where you're either being all in by, a tank support, maybe someone's looking for hooks on you, you're getting camped by a jungler, and if you can't play aggressive the entire time, your champion kind of depreciates very fast because they don't have the greatest utility because most of their power is pushed into damage. And then after that is C tier, which are just champions that either got gutted by patches or just don't have great itemization build path. Champions like Sona and Soraka just don't have tools to peel for them. Janna isn't terrible, but the problem is after the mandate nerfs, I don't really like her with Moonstone that much, which means itemization is kind of awkward on her, and she's relatively weak in that sense. Champions like Braum just have no good matchups at all, and you're kind of relying on your teammates kiting backwards with you and hitting whoever you're targeting. So it's difficult to get this champion off the table. Champions like Pyke and Pantheon need such incredible early games to basically be functional that at that point in time, it doesn't really make sense to play them because they're super unreliable and really inconsistent. And then champions like Gragas and Rakan just struggle with the fact that their dashes are either really predictable or they're just too hard to play in terms of most of the laning phase stuff, since your dashes are interruptible, maybe you have a lot less damage, or their team fighting is really awkward like Gragas is, where you usually have to be some kind of form of engage, but you're actually playing flash to flash most of the time. And then champions like Maokai and Tahm Kench just don't play these champions. They're super bad right now. They've been nerfed too many times to basically kind of be reasonable to play at all. They get outscaled most of the time. And usually the benefits of these champions are very fine-tuned. Like Tahm Kench's, people can play aggressive and you eat them, but most people aren't going to play aggressive enough for you to leverage it, so it's kind of useless in that sense. And then Maokai's main strength mostly was just the fact that he could get to objectives and put saplings down, but a lot of times people have a tendency to be late to objectives, so this value is kind of depreciated a lot. Anyway, guys, hope you guys like that video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment in the section below and hit that bell and whistle, and I'll see you next time. Peace. That's my tier list.